So we can see from our lesson so far, architecture has an intense diversity of features and components, processes, and outcomes. Before going much farther, we should ask the basic question, what is architecture? While you will find the answer to that question in due time over the long course of your life, we can consult a few texts. I've pulled together here 4 simple texts to shed some light on the question. First, we can look at the official definition of architecture from a dictionary. Architecture is the art and science of designing structures and their surroundings in keeping with aesthetic, functional, or other criteria. Architecture is now understood as encompassing the totality of the designed environment, including buildings, urban spaces, and landscapes. The aesthetics of architecture cannot be readily distinguished from those of the other arts: poetry, sculpture, painting, music, dance, and many questions remain to preoccupy architects. What does architecture express? What does it represent? And with what means, symbolic or otherwise, can it do this? Of course, the dictionary would leave us with more questions. So on the same page, we have the root word within architecture, the arc or arch. And we can see that on a very structural, simple level, we have the basic element of shelter, whether it's shelter from a simple stone piling to form an arch, a structural doorway or portal, or the many variations of arches which take on different cultural aesthetic meanings. The pointed arch of the Gothic medieval period, the arch of the Middle East and later Spain, the Moors, the Ogi arch of the Far East and Eurasian cultures, to your classic barrel vault arch of Europe. And so even the most basic form of structure can take on a variety of forms and significances. And so we have to ask the next question, is all building architecture? I would say the answer to that is no, in the same way that not all words are poetry. If we consult Matthew Frederick's lessons from his studies, 101 Things He Learned in Architecture, he quoted Louis Kahn, who said that architecture is the thoughtful making of space. If we look to Christopher Alexander's pattern language, we find that architecture is a language, and specifically that the patterns of architecture form the structure of a network. And we begin with the part of the language which defines a town or community, and architecture leads us in that direction. But if you take the many patterns, for example, a bathroom or a pond, individually do not form architecture, but the bringing together of these elements can. Consider, for example, the 2 patterns of bathing room and water. One defines a part of a house where you can bathe yourself slowly with pleasure, perhaps in company, a place to rest your limbs and to relax. The other is a place in a neighborhood, a pond, a lake, where this water is to gaze upon perhaps to swim in, where children can sail boats and splash about, which nourishes those parts of ourselves which rely on water as one of the great elements of the unconscious and the basic elements of nature. Suppose now that we make a complex of buildings where individual bathing rooms are somehow connected to a common pool, a pond, a lake, where the bathing rooms merge with this common place, where there is no sharp distinction between the individual and the family processes of bathing, of room, of common pool, of nature. In this place, these two patterns exist in the same space. They're identified together. There's a compression of the two. This is another way of thinking about architecture, the bringing together of different elements. In 1933, the USSR, the Soviet Union, now Russia, asked of Frank Lloyd Wright to define for him and for them what architecture and what the architectural process was. They asked a list of 9 questions, from what is the process of sketching to how do you collaborate with sculptors and craftsmen. And his reply very simply was, to show how the wheels go round in the creative mind of an architect is none other than the creation itself.